Throughout the 2000s, a new popular type of horror movie emerged that became known as survival horror. Movies about white Western characters traveling somewhere, usually another country, and finding themselves stranded in a single dangerous location, battling against the natural elements or monsters and struggling to survive. The Descent, Open Water, Cabin Fever, Blackwater, Buried, and 127 Hours were among many examples of survival horror. In 2008, Carter Smith directed a film based on a novel about young people vacationing in Mexico and visiting a remote Mayan ruin, only to find themselves stranded and under attack from deadly carnivorous plants. 2 years later, writer-director Adam Green made a simple, high-concept, low-budget film about a group of friends vacationing in a ski resort, only to find themselves stranded in a chairlift in sub-zero conditions, freezing to death and surrounded by vicious, deadly wolves. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of nature in horror, and we discuss two low-budget survival horrors: Carter Smith's The Ruins and Adam Green's Frozen. Welcome back to the evolution of horror and Happy New Year. My name is Mike Muncer and as ever I am your host. In this podcast we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre, one subgenre at a time. We are currently in the middle of our 10th season exploring the evolution of nature biting back in horror, and this is part 29. In this week's episode, as that intro suggested, we're going to be looking at two vicious little survival horrors from the late 2000s. That's The Ruins from 2008 and Frozen from 2010. Both of these discussions will be spoilerific. Give them both a watch if you can handle it before you listen to our conversation. So, joining me to discuss this week's movies, I've got a returning guest. She was here last year to discuss early 90s thrillers with me, Single White Female and The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, and she's back. A big welcome back to journalist and video producer Maha Albadrawi. Hello Maha, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Mike. Very happy to be here. Little hungover. It's the festive season.
Yeah.
Not gonna
Christmas
lie.
parties.
Yeah.
You were at the BFI Christmas party last night, right? As we're recording this.
And this morning, I got home at 3 a.m.
Oh, I'm so jealous. I miss being at the BFI. Such a lovely, fun place. And they do very good Christmas parties. It's got to be said.
They do, and they've got the loveliest people working there as well. And also, all of us are film nerds. Like you don't work at the BFI unless you're like super nerdy.
Yes.
So yeah, really, really fun, drunken, philosophical conversations about obscure films that we love.
Love it.
My favorite.
And what was your... They always have karaoke at the Christmas party. What song did you sing, Maha?
I sang No Doubts, Don't Speak.
Oh,
it was the penultimate song.
Yeah.
And but I have to give props to the final song, which was Breaking Free by Zac Efron and Vanessa Ann Hudgens, as she was known back then, from High School Musical. Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. Sung by Lilia and Josh from the BFI.
Oh my God, I love
well
that. Excellent. Yeah. What a way to wrap up the night. Beautiful. That's exactly. So nice. Incredible. Well, thank you for being back, Maha. I'm excited. Last year we talked about kind of home invasion movies and that kind of thing. And this year we're kind of doing we're kind of venturing into the great outdoors. We're talking about kind of the horrors of the natural world, animal attack movies and natural disasters and all of that kind of thing. First of all, just what are your thoughts generally, Maha, on these types of movies? Do you like a kind of eco horror and nature horror, movies like Jaws, The Birds, that kind of thing?
I do. I like them, and I feel like they tap into a fundamental fear, which is like this lack of control that we actually have over the world, because we are obviously we dominate the environment that we live in, but that's like such a small part of the world, and actually we're at the mercy of Mother Nature, aren't we? And these are nice little reminders.
Yeah, oh my God, exactly. I think that's the thing that I find quite scary. Like last year, I had so many guests telling me that, home invasion was like their worst, scariest, most troubling kind of subgenre. I actually think this I find worse. There's something about the idea of being like stranded somewhere, because there's no reasoning, I guess, with nature, is there?
No, there's no motivation. Yeah. The antagonist has no motivation. The antagonist is just behaving as it does. It's totally neutral, and it's up to the person trying to survive to make decisions.
Yes.
And it's kind of like them against themselves. It's the characters against themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's and generally speaking as well, I always tend to think these people had it coming. Like, most of the time they're like arrogant sort of white Westerners that are not respecting whatever kind of world or animal or creature or natural habitat that they're in, you know?
Yeah, that was definitely a through line in these two movies. It was basically just people who think that think they're invincible, and then they very quickly realize that the world doesn't actually give a fuck about them.
Exactly. Are you quite an outdoorsy person yourself, Maha, would you say? Like, are you good at being out there with the elements, at one with nature?
I think I kind of am. Like, I'm moderately so. Like, I grew up in New Zealand, so I think
you're a pretty well-travelled person, right? You've been to a lot of places.
Yeah, I have been to a lot of places. In New Zealand, you're kind of outdoorsy by default. You're at the beach a lot,
right?
Hikes, in really thick, dense bush, and I love a good hike. I love open water swimming. I go cold water swimming sometimes. Yeah, it's really fun. It's kind of addictive because you feel like this high afterwards. But I'm not like an extreme sports person. Like, my husband, he's been bungee jumping 3 times.
Wow.
And I have not done that, but I have, I've been like, tree, what are they called? Like tree lining. And I've, been on hikes, and I like it. Yeah. I'm pretty confident. I'd say my element is water. I'm a pretty strong swimmer, and we had great water education in New Zealand, which is important when you live in a place like that.
Yeah. Do you have, I don't know much about the wildlife in New Zealand, like, because obviously everyone always talks about Australia as being like everything there wants to kill you, right?
Yeah.
New Zealand isn't as bad, I guess, is it? Isn't as extreme?
The opposite. Okay. So over time, evolution just turned the place into like this lovely little sanctuary with little flightless birds. Like, our, national bird is the kiwi, which is a little flightless bird that's like too fat to basically like walk around, has tiny little wings, and only comes out at night, sometimes. So no, the nature in New Zealand is much nicer, much kinder than Australia. Australia, everything wants to kill you. Whereas in New Zealand, it's like a lot of big, fat, flightless birds.
Yeah, that's really
the worst thing that ever happened to them was the Europeans coming.
Yeah, exactly. Much more dangerous. It's so true. Have you ever had any scary encounters when swimming in like open water or anything like that? Like, have you ever encountered anything that might kill you, Maha? Ever had any near misses? Anything like that?
If I have, I've like ignored it.
Oh, well, that's good.
I've been stung by jellyfish, which wasn't, very pleasant. And the thing with jellyfish is that like when you've been stung, you suddenly realize you're surrounded by them, and that's quite scary. But I did do something really stupid once, which was, again, very arrogant of me. So the first time I went cold water swimming, I think the water was about 10 degrees, so really, really cold. And I, for some reason, decided to jump in. Just jump in. I was like, the only way I'm going to do this is if I jump in. What happens to your body when you jump into cold water is that basically all your pores close up and your chest tightens. Yeah. And you stop, basically your body goes into like a little bit of shock. So I came up from the water and I couldn't breathe and I panicked. And then luckily I was right by like the dock. So there was a lifeguard there. They were like, calm down. Okay, just breathe, just swim to me. And they kind of like talked me out of the minor shock that I experienced. But that was like, what was I thinking? Because that was also my first time. So I should have gone in very carefully and I didn't. And that was just a little quick reminder that, like nature doesn't care what you think.
It doesn't care. It's bigger and more powerful than us. Absolutely. It's funny as well, though, because these films tend to be quite light, like a lot of the time. Maybe not the two we're going to talk about, actually. These are quite brutal. But when I think about like shark movies and killer spider movies and alligator movies, I don't know, I think of like almost kind of B-movie, like you laugh at it with friends in the cinema kind of a vibe, It's interesting. Like, they have a very different tone, don't they, to like, again, for example, Home Invasion and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I wonder why that is. I wonder if it's because with home invasion movies, it's like humans, there's intent there with the antagonist, whereas with these, I don't know, it's almost a little bit silly. It's usually because someone's done something stupid, someone's done something that they shouldn't have done, and now they're facing the consequences.
Yes.
Like the beginning of Jaws, that did traumatize me, but also, what was Chrissy doing? Come on.
Come on, Chrissy.
What was she doing out there in the middle of the night by herself?
Exactly. I think that's true. I think there's a bit of that where you kind of are watching people be a bit stupid who maybe have it coming. And I think also naturally, until maybe quite recently, it's quite difficult to pull off a realistic looking animal. Like, obviously people have always talked about that with Jaws and the shark, right, and how it never really looked very realistic, and I think that's another part of it. There's a bit of a cheapness about sometimes these sorts of movies, right?
Yes, and I definitely felt that a little bit with the ruins, with the vines. Like, there were some shots when it was a little bit ropey.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk about... We talked about this last week with M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening. Have you seen The Happening, Maha?
I haven't. Should I?
No. Well, no. Most people in the world would say no. It's generally considered like one of the great like turkeys in terms of bad films. Like, it's pretty bad, but it's about kind of killer plants and wind, and essentially like there's a lot of scenes of Mark Wahlberg and Zooey Deschanel kind of looking up at trees blowing in the wind and then like running away from the wind. It's pretty silly, right? So it's a hard thing to pull off. Like, so that's the other thing I think about these movies is like, even though nature is really big and powerful and scary, sometimes I think it's quite hard to put that across on film, in cinema.
It is, because it's also so pretty, Like, am I going to be scared by a tree? But then sometimes it is... I think the consequences are usually what's terrifying. Like, what's that TV show with the mushrooms?
Oh, God. The Last of Us.
The Last of Us.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's scary. But then, like, it wasn't like they were, like, focusing on the fungus. They were focusing on its effects. But I feel like, it is a really hard thing to pull off. Like, how do you make something so beautiful scary?
It is. It's really difficult. It's like a really fine line, I think. So, like, these movies have to kind of balance all of those tones. So let's get into it. We'll talk about how well they pull all of these things off with these two movies we're going to talk about. So, interesting kind of, a lot of parallels, I feel like, with these two films as well that came out in the late 2000s. So we're going to kick off with The Ruins from 2008.
This was a place of sacrifice.
Wow. Beautiful.
It still is.
Did you see that? Something's on me.
They won't let us leave.
Why are they doing this?
It has something to do with the ruins.
Based on the terrifying bestseller.
Get off me! It's inside me. I want to cut it.
The Ruins.
I'm not okay. I keep saying I'm okay. I'm not okay. Why won't you look at me?
So, Maha, before we get into what we thought of it, first of all, just set the scene for us. Give us a little quick plot synopsis of what this movie is all about.
So this movie is about a group of American university students. They're two couples who go on holiday to Mexico, and while they're at their resort, they meet this German traveler who tells them that he's looking for his brother. And the last time he'd heard from his brother had gone on this archaeological dig with a girl, and he hasn't heard from him. But he does have this map, this ancient map of where these ruins might be. So he's like, do you guys want to come with me? And also, does this Greek guy want to come with me? The Greek guy is just there to be shot.
Yeah, literally.
Literally, that's his role. His role is to be, like, dead.
Yep.
And they're like, yeah, sure, we'll come with you to these ancient ruins that might or might not be there, and also we've just met. And
Yes.
And then once they get there, they realize that the ruins are inhabited by something mysterious. The Mayans, who live around the ruins, have decided to quarantine them there. And you quickly realize that it's because the ruins are inhabited by flesh-eating vines.
Indeed, yeah. It's pretty nuts as a story, right? Yeah, it's a fun journey that the film goes on. So, first of all, like, this was your first time watching it, right, Maha?
It was.
What did you make of it? What did you think of this film?
I actually liked it. I was surprised by how much I liked it, and it first of all, it took me back to that era of filmmaking where everything just looks a little bit thin.
Yeah.
Everything looks very, very digital. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to describe it, but films at that era have a specific look that I remember, like, kind of cheap.
Absolutely. Yes, we'll get into this, but you're right. It feels so like 2000s filmmaking.
So late 2000s.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. I thought that the actors did a really good job with the material that they had. I thought that it had a really interesting message about respecting the environment and knowing your place, and also kind of like an anti-imperialist message. So I was really surprised by that, and I'm not sure if that was deliberate or if it was an accident, because I feel like 2008 was not a time when people were talking about respecting like respecting other people's cultures and respecting nature.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it. How about you?
Yeah, me too. I saw this film as a teenager in the 2000s at the cinema, and I remember enjoying it. I didn't really remember much about it. I remembered a few icky moments with vines going up inside people's bodies, and that's about it. And I rewatched it kind of expecting it to look a bit hokey and not great. And actually, I think you're right. Like, as much as, like you say, we'll get into this, but it looks a bit cheap and some of the effects aren't great. It actually is really effective. Like, I was kind of squirming and wincing in certain moments, right? Like, I think, as silly as some of it looks, the writing, the performances, the story is well done enough that the horror is really effective. Like, I found this kind of nasty in like a really good way, like the kind of nasty that you sort of want from a movie like this, you know?
Yeah, and I also thought that the way that the tension builds, the way that it creeps up was really effective. Like, the story beats were really well placed. Mm-hmm. And I think it sustained the tension really well. Yeah. And that sort of creeping dread that the characters were feeling, like, starting out thinking, no, we're going to be fine. We're American tourists. American tourists don't just go missing. Yep. And then that arrogance just sort of quickly, like, vanishing as they realize that, like, they're not getting out of here. It was, I felt it. It was really effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't, and this is one of the things I really like about these movies, these kind of survivalist kind of nature movies, is that you tend to think to yourself, what would I do in this circumstance? It's like, what the fuck would you do? This is one of those really horrible situations where it's like, would you stay up there and basically wait for nature to kill you? Or would you go back down and just let these Mayans shoot you? Like, and part of me is like, maybe I'd just do the latter. I don't know. But it's a pretty grueling, horrible situation to be kind of stuck in for 90 minutes, isn't it? I think,
do you just... Like, do you wait to die whenever, like, slowly and painfully, and also watch your friends die, or do you just go get it over and done with?
Yeah, it's nasty, and I really like that about it. And I think that is where it really fits in with this era of horror movies. I don't know how we're a similar age, right, Maha? I don't know how familiar or how many horror movies you kind of went to see during this time, but horror had a real kind of nasty streak during the 2000s. We had that kind of lovely kind of glossy 90s era of kind of teen horror and stuff, and a lot of people
Slashes.
said, and a lot of people sort of said it was a bit too glossy, it was a bit sanitized, a bit too clean. And suddenly the pendulum swung the other way in the 2000s, and we got the Saw movies, the Hostel movies, all those kind of gritty, grimy remakes made by people like Rob Zombie and Eli Roth. This film very much feels like it fits in with that, right? Like, were you very familiar? Were you a big fan of that kind of horror coming out in that time?
I was, and it was also like, we're like the same age as these characters as well, so I feel like there was this like spate of movies about people our age, kind of going through these situations. So, I really enjoyed them. I remember watching a lot of them, but weirdly, I don't remember the movies themselves. Like, I feel like sometimes I'll come across them and be like, oh yeah, I watched it in 2007 with my friend. And a lot of them aren't very memorable, and a lot of them just sort of like came by like DVD. Like, somebody had a DVD in their flat, and we just watched them on like a Thursday afternoon because instead of going to a lecture.
Right.
And I there's like an exploitation kind of look to them as well, but I also feel like a lot of them, they were better than the exploitation films of like the 70s that I think they looked like, but they weren't actually like. I also feel like I always remember there's always like a layer of sweat and grime that feels palpable.
Yes. There really is. Like there's something kind of scuzzy about these movies. Like, you can almost smell them. We've joked a lot. I've talked a lot with guests about a lot of the 2000s movies. This movie doesn't quite have it, but they have this kind of like greeny brown kind of lighting to them as well. Like I think of the Saw movies and those kinds of remakes of that era, is everything looking a bit green, like the color saturation's been turned down or something, right? Like that's kind of what they all feel like. And this movie doesn't quite have that, but it definitely does, like you say, have this kind of digital sort of cheapness to it in the way it looks, right?
Yeah, it's like a thinness. It's like it's almost like there's no depth of field.
Right. Yeah.
Everything looks really flat. Everything is kind of like lit the same way.
Overlit. Actually, almost overlit in this movie, isn't it? Yeah.
I don't know. I wonder if that was like a thing that they were having with the film stock that they were shooting with, or whether it was these new cameras. Because the other thing I remember about this era was that everything was going digital. And it was usually like people our age who were tasked with like digitizing things, or like, like bringing a student to come and digitize all these tapes. So I feel like people didn't quite know, they weren't quite familiar with the technology. The technology was easier to shoot with and cheaper, but I don't think they had quite mastered it yet.
Right. You're so right. And I think also this kind of, I don't know, the teen movie sort of changed as well in the 2000s. Like in the 90s, when there were movies like Clueless and Scream, I don't know, they felt a little bit more kind of, I guess, female-centric, right? And then it went to, I would say, a slightly more bro-y place in the 2000s. Like, and I remember this as a teenage boy, because I think a lot of these movies were being aimed at me. American Pie in the early 2000s, and then films like Road Trip, Euro Trip, those kind of like lads on tour type movies, right? And
so gross, like Van Wilder.
Dude,
Where's My Car?
Dude, Where's My Car? Exactly. Like there was this massive wave of kind of like frat boy sort of comedies, right?
Yeah.
And I think that really ekes into horror too, teen horror at this time. Like Hostel, again, these kind of like backpacking lads in Eastern Europe that end up getting tortured and cut up and all sorts, right? And I think there's a bit of that, right? When we're introduced to our four main characters, our two couples, right? There is that real kind of bros on tour, right, kind of vibe to it, I think.
Yeah, they're in bikinis, and obviously you've got two women there, so obviously you can only have two types, the Madonna and the whore. You know, like one of them is like this blonde, butter would melt in her mouth, like, you know, relationship girl, and then the other one is Jenna Malone.
Yes, exactly.
And, you know, like constantly flirting with everyone. And you know what? Good for her. Yeah. She's at that point in her life.
She's having a great time. Yeah.
Yeah, but like everybody's very judgy about her. Like, come on. But yeah, it is very male gazy. I feel like feminism was in a weird place at this time. It was kind of like post third wave. So there was this attitude of, okay, if women, you know, we've got women's rights now. So that means you have to be like a dude. You have to like, you have to play with the boys. You have to, in order to be a cool feminist, you had to basically submit to this kind of objectification, because if you don't, then you're a prude.
Yeah, you would have been in New Zealand, right, at this time, I guess. And I don't know what it was like over there, but over here as well, there was this real culture of kind of laddie journalism too. Yeah. So we had like magazines like Loaded, FHM. It was when the tabloids were really nastily going for like any young women in pop culture, essentially, right, as well. And again, that kind of that vibe was kind of feeding into all elements of culture, I think, including horror at this time.
It was. At that time, I was a uni student, but I was doing like a bit of modeling. And I definitely saw that in castings and, you know, and shoots, and it was so normalized that it never occurred to me to say anything. Right. It didn't occur to me until much later. I was like, that was weird. And like someone I know, like one of my agents basically was convicted of like sexual assault. And then when I thought back of all the stuff that he did, I was like, that wasn't okay. And it did feel weird, but as an 18-year-old, you just, it was so normal.
Of course. Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like it seeped into every part of culture until maybe, 10 years later, when finally people were just like, that's not normal. It shouldn't be okay. You shouldn't feel unsafe if you're doing it, no matter what your job is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it definitely was present in New Zealand as well.
It was a weird time. It was a weird, slightly regressive time. Like, I think, and only now that some time has passed, I feel like we can look at the 2000s slightly more objectively and go,
this was a very specific point in time when, like, it almost felt like we talked together last time about the kind of early 90s kind of erotic thriller movies and just how interesting those movies were. And it feels like we went a step backwards in the 2000s, right? From all of that stuff. Almost.
I think that was the backlash. Like that, that was the aftermath of the backlash to second wave feminism when people thought, feminism's gone too far. And I think we're kind of going through something similar
we
now.
Are. Yes.
It's cyclical, and you live long enough and you just sort of like expect it and you sort of have to roll your eyes at it. It's like, no, it hasn't gone too far. It hasn't gone far enough.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, it was a funny time, and it was a funny time to be a young woman.
Right, yeah, I bet it was. Yeah, I really, really interesting and a pretty bad time in a way to be a boy coming of age when this was all the pop culture that you had surrounding you as well, right? Like it
was definitely a very specific, take on masculinity and what boys should be like. You know how people are kind of nostalgic for the 2000s now, like there's not I don't get that. Like I'm not. Do you know what I remember about the 2000s? I remember the Iraq War. I remember the war on terror, and like media being weirdly like having this conservative edge to it.
Yeah, definitely.
So live through it. Don't have nostalgia for it.
I also feel like, as well, FYI, I was talking about this with Becky Dark the other day. We were saying maybe one of the most ugly decades for fashion too. The hairstyles, the clothes, and they're starting to come back. But we were saying, like, why are we don't need the boot cut jeans and the abundance of hair gel and whatever else coming back in. Like, no, thank you.
It didn't look good the first time. No. We crawled so you can walk. Why are you choosing to crawl again? Like I saw. Oh my god! I saw this young girl wearing like a full like midi skirt over bootcut jeans, and I don't know why she's doing it.
It's so funny.
I don't know. Like, you can wear whatever you want. I truly believe that, but I also think, people made these mistakes already. Don't do them again.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it was like a weird like 80s revival, but via the 2000s.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's it. Everything is cyclical, like you say. Kind of the 90s kind of very much hark back to the 70s. 2000 was kind of doing something else, and it comes and goes in waves, doesn't it? And I feel like we're in we've had a lot of kind of 90s nostalgia recently, haven't we, as well? Because everyone suddenly has gone, oh, the 90s was actually a really nice time, wasn't it?
Yeah, and this is where I'm going to show that I'm a complete hypocrite, because I actually love the 90s revival. That's my happy place. But yeah, so I guess, young people, Gen Z, they're allowed to be nostalgic for the 2000s because if they're not, then I wouldn't be allowed to be nostalgic for the 90s, and that's not fair.
I know. But I also think objectively the 90s were a peaceful, happy, quite prosperous time for a lot of the world compared to the 2000s, Yeah. I get it more. Yeah.
I think it was was it called the end of history era, where everyone was like, we've solved most of the problems of the world. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't great in Iraq. But then we moved to New Zealand and things got, they were a lot nicer.
Exactly. So there you go. So it was a weird time for kind of movies anyway. And I feel like you definitely get that vibe at the very beginning, where you meet these kind of 4 kids on holiday, and it's all like bikinis and who's sleeping with who and all of that kind of stuff. And then they get to this kind of Mayan temple. And this is kind of the interesting part, like you said, Maha, that it's like not quite the kind of maybe the xenophobia that you might expect ultimately this movie to have, right?
Yeah, I was impressed because there was another thing I remember about the 2000s was the xenophobia, especially against like non-white people from foreign lands.
Right.
Usually they would portray it as like, monstrous and dumb and basically like terrorists. And here, I actually think that the Mayans are portrayed as just caretakers. They're the ones they're actually the good people, because they're trying to stop this thing from spreading. Yeah. It's the I want to call them invaders, but the people, the Westerners who are coming in, they don't know what they're dealing with, who are actually the cause of the danger. Yeah. And I feel like there's a bit of, I feel like the anxiety in this film as well is a little bit of what happens when you send kids overseas to foreign lands and they don't know what they're dealing with. And obviously at that time, America was in Afghanistan and it was in Iraq, and they were sending young people overseas to places where they didn't know what they were dealing with, and a lot of them were dying. And I wonder, I don't know if it's intentional or if they made that connection on purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, and it's the same with Hostel too. I talked about this with Hostel, where you could read it as a bit of a xenophobic movie, I think, that with these American tourists go to Eastern Europe, and in Eastern Europe they're all psychopaths and weird, and and there's these kind of torture dungeons and all of that kind of stuff. But then also there is that element of it's America kind of just disrespecting and walking into these scenarios that they have no idea about and don't respect enough to kind of think about, So, and I think that element is probably more interesting in this film, actually, the way that it's dealt with. Yeah,
I completely agree. What did you think of the portrayal of the Mayans here?
Yeah, well, it's shocking initially, isn't it? Like, it is a shocking moment when we get that. But it's Dimitri, isn't it? It's the character that's introduced just to be shocked. The Greek, who... It is a really shocking moment. We're like 15 minutes into the runtime. They arrive at this Mayan ruin, and suddenly this guy who, because he touches one of the vines, is immediately basically shot. He gets a bullet in the head and an arrow through the chest, and you're like, holy shit, like, this is it now. The movie, like, the horror's started. And it starts pretty brutal and pretty unrelenting in terms of the way that these characters are portrayed. But I think ultimately, by the end, you kind of get what's going on here and why these characters are doing what they're doing and why these Americans or these Western Europeans are being treated the way they're treated. So, I was kind of all right with it. I think this movie is really effective. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And so... Where did your sympathies lie? Like, did you want them to escape? Or were you like, oh no, I don't think they should escape? Because I was of two minds. Like, I didn't want them to escape and spread this, whatever it is.
Right.
I don't know what it is. I don't want them to like, for the quarantine to be broken, but also they're the protagonists. So I did want them to escape.
Yeah.
I didn't know where my sympathies lay.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think this is the fun thing about these kind of survival movies, where you of course you kind of want them to survive because you can't help it. They're your protagonist, and you do put yourself in that situation, and you go, oh my god, this is a horrible situation. I sort of want to see them get out of it, but at the same time, A, I'm watching a horror film and I kind of like watching all of the horror and the suffering. And B, I think they kind of have it coming. And C, like you say, it actually, ultimately, would it be so much worse for the world if they escape?
Yeah.
And there were a couple of alternate endings to this film as well. Like they tried out and filmed different endings, and one was about the character of Amy. She drives away in the Jeep, but there's a close-up of her face, and we see the moving vines crawling in her face, like, so essentially as if to be like, she's going to now spread this across the world, essentially. And they cut that from the film, so that's interesting.
I was wondering about that because I thought... I was happy that she escaped. I was like, yeah, there's a bit of catharsis there. But then when afterwards, I was like, hang on, was she infected? And is she going to spread it? And also watching this movie post a pandemic, I think is a different experience to watching it before that. Because did you feel differently about it, having gone through everything that we've gone through?
Definitely. I felt that throughout this whole series, actually, because so many of these movies do like end up going into a kind of infection storyline in some way, some kind of pandemic type storyline. And I think they do have they pack an extra punch now watching them post COVID, definitely. Like, I think you can't help but kind of, again, have a slight visceral reaction to watching something be carelessly spread around the world by these characters. Yeah, it's kind of like, again, it makes you kind of recoil slightly, doesn't it? Yeah.
I didn't know much about this movie when I watched it, and you just reminded me that when I was first watching it, and when I first saw them, getting to the village and the Mayans surrounding them, I thought that the Mayans' worry was that they would be bringing diseases. I thought they'd like traveled some sort of... that they traveled to like another dimension and that they were worried about them bringing diseases. I didn't realize that they were worried about containing a disease.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely.
So, yeah, I thought that was really, really clever. I think it could have gone both ways.
Totally. And actually, I remember thinking that when I first watched it in the cinema back in 2008, that I didn't know what this movie was about. And I think because, again, the wave of movies we'd had Hostel, Wolf Creek, I was like, oh God, is it going to be a movie about Mayan locals being murderer, torturers? Like, is that the film that, and when it starts you think, oh God, that's the film we're in, right? They're going to get like captured and tortured or whatever.
I tried to find out if that was deliberate, if the message of this film was on purpose. I couldn't find anything, couldn't find any interviews, couldn't find any like behind the scenes feature it. So do you know anything about the writing?
I don't think that was intentional. I mean, maybe it was. I mean, it was based on a book, right, as well. But both the book and the film, I think, are meant to be very much kind of eco-horror movies, like natural horror films. Like, I think they're supposed to be about our treatment of nature and the world and respecting nature and what happens if you disrespect nature, essentially. So I think, I think that's the intention of the film. But I would not be surprised if, given the era of horror that we were in, those filmmakers were slightly teasing or slightly like playing with those tropes of like the hostile locals, right? Because you definitely feel that when the film first starts.
Yeah, definitely. When I was trying to find, like some more material about the making of this film, the only thing I could find was the original trailer, which was actually uploaded to YouTube 15 years ago.
Amazing. Love that.
And the trailer sells it as like it sells it as like this thing where like they go and they find something evil. It almost makes it look like a supernatural horror.
Yes.
And it's so not that.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's almost like you could imagine it to be like an Indiana Jones or the Mummy type kind of excavation supernatural movie or something.
Yeah, and I think that makes it even scarier. There was definitely an era of like bad trailers, like trailers that missold films, like, like Jennifer's Body.
Right.
And a lot of films around that time that were just sort of selling films a specific way, but kind of misselling them.
Yeah.
And I thought if I had seen that trailer and watched this film, I would have thought I had been like, I'd been tricked, because I also think that the concept of the film is so much more interesting than what they were painting it out to be, because there is no evil here.
No.
This is all neutral. And what's scary is that it's not supernatural, it's natural.
Yeah.
So again, there's no intent behind the antagonist. It's just doing what it's doing.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel like there's like a bit of a moral, there's a moral quandary here. It's like, do I want them to survive, or have they, do they need to lie in the bed that they've made?
And and we'll talk about this with Frozen, of course, both these movies, because ultimately what happens is they get to the top of this Mayan ruin, and that's where we spend the rest of the film, basically, right? It's just 4 people stuck at the top of this kind of temple in one location. And again, there was such a wave of these types of movies around this time, and I find all of them incredibly stressful, whether it's like Open Water with the sharks, Buried, that film where Ryan Reynolds is just in a coffin for the whole 90 minutes. There's 127 Hours, the Danny Boyle film where the guy gets stuck under the rock, like these kind of one man in nature kind of movies that again they are really stressful, and that is essentially what this movie ends up being, right? It's just 4 people trapped with the elements, ultimately.
Yeah, and like you said, you can't help but put yourself in that situation, and that is what is so stressful, because I don't think I would be very good in any of these situations.
No.
Like, lucky one of them
absolutely.
is a med student, right?
Yes.
I have no survival skills. Like, I don't even know what I'm allergic to, really. So I feel like I'd be the first to go.
I know. We're all a nightmare these days. We can't even handle wheat, let alone like, a ancient Mayan ruin with deadly vines. Like nobody would stand a chance, I think, these days. But yeah, like they do. They have a med student in the mix, which is quite good. But again, you get the kind of body horror in this movie, don't you? Which is
the body horror in this film is so effective.
Grim, and it begins straight away when Matthias, right, he falls down the hole in the middle of the temple, and his leg like snaps the wrong way. And both in this and Frozen, we get a lot of like bones protruding through legs and all of that kind of thing, right?
Yep.
And it's nasty from the get-go, isn't it? The body horror,
the sound as well of that snapping. You're just like, oh, those are bones. It's almost like you could feel it. And then and then the vines like creeping up under the skin. That made me want to vomit. I did not like that at all.
Yeah, it's grim, isn't it? And it does look a little cheap, and we can see now that it looks very much like kind of 2000s CGI, right? Yeah. But again, it doesn't matter actually, because I agree with you. I think just the idea of it, of those vines. So obviously the temple is like surrounded by these kind of vines that end up kind of, like attacking people essentially, like getting inside their body. And there's that moment as well when the guy, Matthias, who they rescue from the hole, and he's got his broken legs, and he sleeps, and the next morning they remove the blanket from over his legs, and the vines have completely kind of consumed his like rotting moldy legs, right? And it's so grim.
I know, and they have to decide to amputate the legs, and ultimately they realize they've done it for no reason, because he dies immediately afterwards. So they did that for no reason.
Oh my God. The leg amputation as well. It is nasty.
I know.
Like that is. They have to smash it in with a rock.
I know, very misery. Ugh.
Yes. It's so grim.
That was a moment when I was like, could I do that? Because you know how you hear about people, like doing like mercy killings and, in situations that are so desperate that they have to do that. I don't know if I could, and I don't want to know.
I know.
But
I know.
It was so tense. And with the CGI as well, like, it is a bit ropey, but I feel like at that point, like the tension had built up so effectively that I actually didn't care, because the idea of it, the thought of it was enough. It's just a suggestion of it. I actually think that this film does CGI really well, because I think that they knew they couldn't do it perfectly, so they did it effectively. Like, the shots were they used those shots sparingly, but enough to basically make me feel really uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And I really like as well, again, like the effect that it has on their own kind of mental state and paranoia, right? So obviously, like, it's the Stacy character, isn't it, who ends up getting infected by the vines, and they end up in her brain, right, in her head. And all of their kind of like silly sort of teenage dramas kind of get woven into this kind of state of paranoia they're in, right? Where she thinks that her boyfriend is sleeping with her best friend, Jenna Malone. And like, but it's actually, I guess, the effect that the vines are having on her brain and everything, right? But again, I found all that really effective and powerful. Just this idea that like you can't do anything about it; it's in your body, and it's now taking hold of your brain, kind of thing. Yeah,
it's like, what do? You can't run away; it's your body, so you have to cut it out. And again, another thing where I don't know what I would do, and I hope I never have to know. This is the part of like nature horror that makes me really squeamish, when the horror is basically inside or on your body. It's like, what do you do? You can't run away from it. You can't hide from it. It's in you. I found that bit really, like really, really effective. And I found the screaming vines a little bit funny. I will say that. But also mean. Like, how did they need to do that? That was a little bit bitchy, guys.
I know. It's like, again, you talk about how it is kind of amoral, right? Like they're just doing what they're doing. But there is a bit of like sadism about what these vines are doing, right? Like the fact that you say they almost like taunt them with the way that they can mimic human voices and sing and speak and stuff.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, because I just remembered that because that's not the main part of the film. I feel like the main tension is the fact that they've impeded on this environment that they're not supposed to be in. But yeah, there is a little bit of sadism as well, just a little touch.
Yeah, and I love that. And I know what you mean. Like some of it in execution was quite silly and funny, but I like the creepy idea of it, like that idea of like, because they that does occur in nature, doesn't it? Like, is it hyenas and certain species that can like mimic the sounds of voices, and cats are able to make this sound that sounds like a baby crying and stuff. And there's something almost evolutionary that makes animals be able to make certain noises that almost mimic the sounds of humans or young babies or whatever. And I always find that quite a creepy idea, you know?
It is. It's really scary, because we think that we're the smart ones. We think that we're the smartest species, and you know, we're not. Like, there are some environments where we are absolutely ill-equipped to survive. But also, even in those situations, it's like the animals are just doing what they do. Like, nature is just doing what it does. It's doing what it does to survive in its environment, and we're not meant to be there.
Right.
So
exactly.
I don't know if it is evil. Like, I don't know if there is intent because, again, and I still think it is. There's a little bit of amoralism to nature.
I think you're right. Ultimately, like, nature can appear quite cruel and relentless, but it is just doing what it's doing, isn't it? And
it's just surviving. It's not trying to like take over, or is it actually?
Well, maybe.
Oh,
I guess we don't know, do we? Ultimately, by the end, but yeah, I do love that, and I think that this movie overall does quite a good job. Like we said at the very beginning of our chat, how do you make plants scary, like killer plants? And I've talked about a couple of films this series. We did Day of the Triffids, which was a great story, but this 80s BBC adaptation of it has like these big rubber plants that actually have legs and they can walk and attack people. Yeah, and it doesn't look very scary or imposing. And again, we had M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening, where we've just got trees blowing in the wind and it's not very effective and scary. I think in some ways this is the most effective version I've seen of this, where these kind of vines that creep and move and can infect you and get inside you, that's much more effective. And I found myself like genuinely squirming in my seat a little bit at times.
Yeah, because you have no defense against that. You know, you can't like shoot it. You can't, like you can't make it's too small.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, so I like that, and like generally, I think the movie does a pretty good job. Like, how do you find the pacing of it? Because again, a lot of these movies where it's like, okay, we're stuck in one location. How do we make this work dramatically across like 90 minutes? But how did you find generally just like the pacing of the movie? Did it ever get boring for you?
No. Oh my God, bring back the 90-minute runtime. I think that this movie was the perfect length.
Yeah.
The pacing was really, really well executed. So I feel like the creep of the tension was done really well. I think the story beats were perfect.
Yeah.
We know enough about the characters for their actions to make sense.
Yep. Yeah.
So I thought that was good because we did not need, we didn't need any more backstory than what we got. It was quite efficient storytelling, I thought.
It was. Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like it sustained attention really, really well to the point where the denouement actually made sense. It was like, it was chaotic and tragic.
Yeah.
But everything that happened, the build-up, it was like a payoff for a build-up.
Yeah, definitely. I loved it. And also, the moment when the Stacey character has become so, like, infected that there's that moment when the friends just find her cutting into various parts of herself, right, as well. That is horrible. The way her leg is, like, sliced, her thigh is, like, sliced
just
open.
Flame. Yeah. And her expressionless face as well. Like, she's just saying, I've got to cut it out. Like, wouldn't you be in so much pain? But also, are you in so much shock that you don't actually know, you can't feel anything? Where do you go from there? Yeah, I thought that was really well done. And then, when she asked to be killed, that was so sad.
It really sad. Again, like quite nasty in a way, this film for like a teen movie. And then of course we just end. What do you think of Jenna Malone, by the way? We mentioned that she's become like, out of the four of them, she's become like the big name in this movie since. What do you think of her in this film?
I really like Jenna Malone. I like her in everything. I think she always understands the assignments.
Yeah.
Like, remember she was in Pride and Prejudice, like playing a British girls. I think she's one of my favorite, like, childhood teen actors who were like not like the biggest names. Like, she was a reliable talent.
Mm-hmm.
I think I thought she did really well with the material that she was given. Like, her character was basically like her basically she was just told to be slutty, like that her character has a lot of judgments just because I don't know,
because she likes
to flirt.
Yeah.
Imagine that. And on the opposite side of that is the Laura character who like has to be and another gross thing is like she has to be forced to give her boyfriend a blowjob. It's like So, I thought Jenna Malone was great. I think all of them did really well. I really like that Sean guy, the one, the blonde one. He's another one of those actors who I I saw in so many films. I don't know his name, but I feel like he looks like a Sean.
Sean Ashmore. Yeah. He would end up becoming Iceman in the X-Men trilogy.
Right.
I guess that they were like his big movies at the time, I guess. But yeah, I can't believe I hadn't noticed this, but this is the same actor who's in Frozen. Sean Ashmore plays Lynch, right? Plays the main guy in Frozen, which I didn't even realise that connection as I was watching them back to back. So there you go.
He survived the ruin. He survived the ruins, and then he ended up,
going skiing.
getting stuck in a chairlift.
There you go. You see, there you go. So yeah, he's in a lot of kind of genre and horror films. Yeah, but yeah, I thought they were solid. They did exactly what they had to do, and enough for me to, again, completely kind of immerse myself in this film, I wasn't really thinking about any ropey dialogue or ropey visual effects as much as I was just going, oh my God, what would you do in this at this point,
Yeah, I thought they did really well with the material.
And I liked their plan. I think it's a pretty smart plan, about as good a plan as you can make at the end, which was that he sort of says, I will distract the Mayans and run in the other direction and basically get shot and killed so that you, Jenna Malone, can run the other way and escape, essentially, right?
And we have our final girl.
Yeah, and we get that very classic 2000s horror movie final girl kind of shot as she drives away into the distance with the kind of the hot, kind of white hot sun on the road as she drives off, like screaming and crying and covered in blood. Yeah.
What did you think about the ending? Because now that I know there's an alternate ending, are you satisfied with it?
I quite like that it just gives you a kind of closure ending, and I don't always like that. I sometimes love a kind of nasty ending. Like a couple of weeks ago, we talked about The Descent and what an incredible movie that is, an incredible ending as well, but a nasty ending. And yeah, this movie did have a couple of alternate endings. So I think one of them was kind of closer to the ending of the book, which is where she drives away. We see a close-up of moving vines, and then we cut to later on, she's dead, I think, back in America. And there's a caretaker seen walking among various headstones, and he's whistling a song. I think he's whistling Frere Jacques. And then suddenly we hear the tune being mimicked by these plants coming out of a gravestone, and we see that it's Amy's headstone, essentially, and like the vines are kind of coming out. And apparently they shot that, and then test audiences just found it too much. Like the director kind of said that the film was such a punishing film that the audience wanted something a little bit more, cathartic by the end, I think.
Yeah. Just to know that we don't need to know what happens. I was really happy with the ending. Yeah. I was happy with it. But like I said before, like I did wonder later on, I was like, oh my God, did she take it out into the world? Right. But in the moment, it was a satisfying ending. And I just, I love that shot. It's like that Texas Chainsaw Massacre shot of the girl, making out in a car and just sort of like screaming.
Yeah, I love it. Me too.
Yeah.
There's a reason why that is such a classic. The Texas Chainsaw ending of the girl whose like sanity is barely intact, right? Like running along an empty road and screaming. Yeah.
It's a release after all that tension. I actually agree with the filmmaker there. I think the film was punishing enough, and he gave us something at the end.
Yeah, exactly. A bit of catharsis that we all needed. Like we all needed that kind of scream into the daylight at the end, I think. So yeah, it's good. It's good. How do you find it? I mean, like we talked about this a lot, about how it's very much like a product of its time, right? But do you think it kind of holds up okay watching it in 2024? It doesn't feel too dated?
I was surprised at how well it held up. I mean, there were a couple of things in there that definitely don't hold up, like the whole thing around the Sean guy basically forcing his girlfriend to give him oral sex is not cool. Yes. And the attitudes towards women is very dated of its time. But I don't know. I feel like everything else is kind of timeless. It's the fear, the fear of the unknown, the fear of like of nature. I think everything else actually holds up really well, and I also appreciate that it's not as xenophobic as it could have been.
Absolutely. I think like actually the movie holds up better than I was expecting it to. I think it's really powerful and nasty in the right way, it's horrific in the right way, I think, in the way that it was intended. Yeah. Even
the characters understand what the Mayans are doing. I think I think even the characters understand that like they're trying to contain something.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that's quite clever.
What is that?
It's everything.
Sarah, have you watched those?
No.
So you have no idea what's on them?
How beautiful is this?
Hell House.
It's a brand new year and it's time to kick off some brand new mini seasons over on Patreon. And that little clip you just heard there from Hell House LLC is a little hint of what we've got coming up over on Patreon for $10 donors. Because people have been asking me for this for a very long time, we are finally kicking off a found footage mini season, and in which we are going to be covering some of the best and most interesting and most important and scariest found footage movies ever made. I have never seen any of the Hell House LLC films. I'm told by multiple people that they are terrifying, and there's a really scary clown in the first one. I'm slightly nervous about it, but I can't wait. We are also going to be watching and covering a whole bunch of other films that absolutely shit me up, including Incantation, Noroi the Curse, The Medium, and the Poughkeepsie tapes. So there's loads of really good stuff, both from Asia and from the US and UK, that we're going to be covering. It's going to be a really fun series featuring lots of different brilliant guests. So that's what we've got coming up over the next few months on Patreon. So if you want to check that out, you simply need to sign up to our Patreon at the higher $10 per month level. If you sign up at $5, you will still get access to loads of other episodes, including our monthly Fresh Blood Strand, in which me and my co-hosts Brad, Becky, and Steph cover all of the new releases in horror across all different mediums. Next week, we are dropping our special Best of 2024 episode, in which we count down our top 24 horror films of 2024. So that's going to be really fun. So that's available for $5 donors. But everybody who signs up, no matter what tier, will also get a little shout out on the main podcast as a thank you. So speaking of, I'm going to give everybody who signed up in the month of October a little shout out. So a big thank you to Gabriella, Gemma Stewart, Matthew Walker, Michael Odegaard, Chris Tompkins, Jen, Matt Quarterman, Liz Evans, Tico Polido, Alex Martin, Rachel Walker, Lisbon Cabiok, Brittany, Curry McKinley, Kerry Carlisle, Sean Lynch, Andrew Cowham, Harlan, Denise Davis, Haley M, Emma Jane, John Gonclaves, Chris Murphy, Danielle Dewar, Kate Norton, Michelle Jackson, Nina Hemmingson, Neil Wimpney, Miki, Tina Venz, Colonel Forbin, Ralph Andrades, Catriona Easdale, John Huppenthal, Jack Hardiman, Sam Munster, Michael Y, Gular, and Jimbo77. A huge thank you to all of those people for signing up in the month of October. And one more time, if you want to join them and get treated to regular bonus content and more, then sign up now. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. That's patreon.com/evolution of horror. Okay, let's move on to the second half of this week's episode, in which Maha Albadrawi and I discuss Adam Green's Frozen from 2010.
No one knows that we're up here.
This is so messed up.
It's Sunday, and they're not open again till Friday.
We're up here all week. We're gonna die. Oh my god! Oh my god!
I don't want to die of it. Help!
So this time we have 3 American uni students who have gone to a ski resort and they scan their way onto a chairlift, and through a truly stupid series of coincidences, they end up getting stuck there after the resort closes. And when they realize that the park will be closed for another 5 days, they have to work out how to get down before they freeze to death.
Indeed. A nice simple premise, right? Like almost like a one-liner, like high concept premise. I love it.
Exactly. Really easy elevator pitch. Like, you're stuck in a chairlift overnight. How do you get down?
Yeah, that is it. Oh my god. I remember seeing this film at Fright Fest in 2010 when it premiered, actually, and I remember finding it an incredibly stressful experience even then. What did you make of this film, Maha?
I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's as good as The Ruins.
Agreed.
I think that the concept is it holds up. I don't think it sustains for the runtime. But I like the idea because it is, again, something where I could put myself in that situation and think about what would I do, because they're not equipped to handle this.
No. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I did find myself glancing down at my phone occasionally, in particularly the second half of this movie. Like, I think it does, like you say, compared to The Ruins that really kind of like zips along, I think this movie kind of slightly struggles to sustain its kind of tension and its runtime of, and to be fair, it's a difficult thing to pull off. Like, it's just 3 people or 2 people for the most part just sitting in a chair, basically, like for the bulk of the movie. So it must have been really hard to pull that off in a way. And it does have some amazingly horrible, scary moments in it. Again, there were moments when I was like, oh, fuck. You know, particularly the wolves. I didn't like the wolves.
Oh, my God, the wolves. Yeah. I also think that the film isn't very creatively shot or edited. And I think that also made it drag a little bit. For me, the bit that dragged was actually the middle.
Yeah.
After the guy dies. What's his name? I always forget the names.
Oh, God. Good question. Let me have a look. Is it Joe? No,
Joe.
That's the other one. Joe Lynch, who's
the Sean Ashmore.
Yeah, I need to tell you as well. So this was directed by Adam Green, who is a kind of like, sort of well known as kind of an indie horror filmmaker. He made films like the Hatchet movies and stuff. Yeah. And he's always quite big. He always turned up at genre festivals like Fright Fest and that kind of thing. And there was another director who is like his best mate, like his best bro mate, called Joe Lynch. And the two of them were always at like Fright Fest together, and they were always around, seen as a pair. Yeah. And so he's named his main character in this Joe Lynch, which I thought was quite funny and clearly quite deliberate. And actually, Joe Lynch makes a cameo as one of the random other skiers in this movie as well. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of kind of cameos and nudges towards like previous horror films or horror actors or horror directors and that kind of thing. But yeah, the Sean Ashmore character is Joe Lynch, and the other character is Dan, played by Kevin Zegers.
Who is the guy from Air Bud? That's how I know him.
Right, okay, there you go. Yeah. Yes. So he dies pretty quickly, right? He jumps off the chair.
Oh, God,
breaks all of his... And again, why would you jump? I was like, I don't think I would have deliberately tried to jump feet first like that. Like, maybe just kind of flop yourself, belly flop or something.
Yeah, like loosen up a little bit. That was really stupid. So, so I actually have a theory about what I would do in that situation. Do you want to hear my theory?
Please, yeah.
Okay,
please.
so they're stuck in this chairlift, and the problem is that it's really high. Mm-hmm. So what I would do is I would get everyone to take off all their clothes. I would make a rope out of the clothes because they're all made from nylon, which is really strong. Yes. And then I'd lower the lightest person down and then pull the clothes back up so that everybody gets to stay warm and get that one person to run down the hill. Problem solved.
Oh my god, Maha. Well, there you go. Like, you've already proved you're better than all these characters, and you're better than I would be. I wouldn't have thought of that, but that's that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I was just thinking to myself that I would have lowered myself off that chair in a better way than he did. Like, he just kind of like
leaps off.
He leaps off first, and I would have lowered to the point where I was hanging from the bottom of the chair.
Yeah.
And then eventually dropped, let my body go completely floppy, right? And just hope that I just come away with maybe a sprain or two, right? But yeah, just not the way that he... Because they're not so high that you would definitely die from jumping off that, right? And there is snow that I would have thought would slightly cushion before.
Yeah, I feel like these characters are really thinly drawn.
They're
and
pretty
I
bad.
think that, you know, the middle part where they try and get a bit of backstory, by that point I was like, I don't care. Like, you need to do that at the beginning, not now.
Yes, agreed.
My problem with this film was that it more triggered my OCD than my fear of the cold. Because like, why would you not? Okay, I do actually have OCD, and it's not the cute OCD where you're organized. It's the one where I have to check everything. Like, it's like compulsively checking things. And when that guy left without checking that everybody was off, I was like, okay, here's what I would do. Okay, I would mark one of the chairlifts, and I would make it do a full round and make sure that, you know, like, when I see that marked chairlift come back, that's when I know when everyone is off the chairlifts.
Exactly.
Easy.
Exactly.
If you have OCD, this wouldn't happen.
I know. This is.
But no, they were just like, I know, I'm gonna.
I think that is the thing that slightly undercuts this whole film, is that every character is quite stupid, right? The people that work in the ski resort are stupid. The people that are on the chairlift are a bit stupid. Like, and yeah, I think you're right. As opposed to with the ruins, where you genuinely feel like, oh my God, like you're stuck here. Like, what would you do? I feel like a lot of the things here could have been avoided.
Yeah, if everybody just like thought about it for 2 seconds. Also, why does no one have a cell phone? It is 2010. Right. We all had cell phones.
That's a really good point. Yeah, really good point. Yeah, and usually a lot of horror films around this time had to come up with some reason, like, oh, there's no signal here, or the battery's run out, or something.
See, that
but
I would have believed.
They didn't even attempt that, actually.
No,
they
made Sean Ashmore flirt with someone for the specific purpose of letting us know that he doesn't have his phone on him.
Yeah,
because she's like, let me get your number, and he's like, oh, I don't have my phone.
Yes,
let me remember your number, and then the audience is like, oh, he doesn't have his phone. Uh-oh.
Oh, God. Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Yeah.
Like, from the moment as well, I posted this on Instagram, but like 2 minutes into the film, and the main guy is like unzipping his girlfriend's jacket, and we're getting a close-up of her tits, basically, like as they're about to get on the ski lift.
This film does not... this film has never met a woman.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just like, go flirt with him. Oh,
yeah.
God.
Yeah,
and then, of course, they're going to come by, and then he's going to realize that, like, she's not with her girlfriends. Like, everybody is so stupid.
Yep. Yeah.
And then, also, I feel like this film, you know, it definitely took a little bit of joy in torturing the Emma character a lot more. Like, I don't know if we needed to see a close-up of her crotch when she was weeing herself. That was mean.
I agree. Like, I don't quite know why that moment was a thing, really. Like,
I don't know either.
Maybe... Is it kind of, because there's a moment earlier on in the film where one of the male characters has to pee, right? And he just does it instantly, and he pees off the chair, and it's kind of like everything's easy for him because he's a bloke.
Yeah.
And then with her, it's like, oh, look at how much more traumatic this whole thing is for her. But you're right. Like, I don't think we necessarily needed that long close up of her peeing herself. Yeah.
No, it was this film was shot really strangely. Like, there was that shot which I don't think was necessary and felt a bit mean-spirited. And there were a lot of moments when I felt like a good close-up would have sustained the tension a little bit more. So there's later on in the film when Joe Lynch is climbing down the pole, and it's just shot from a long shot from behind. We don't see his face at all.
Yeah.
And then while she's crawling towards the road at the end, again, shot from far away, we don't get a close-up of her. So I felt like it was very pedestrian.
I agree.
I think that would have helped.
And it didn't quite establish the danger and the tension of that moment when he's hanging from the rope too, because it's cutting into his hands. And I feel like he didn't really make use of that. Like, I thought we might get a close-up of it kind of making his hand start to bleed or something, but it doesn't really do any of that, does it? It's really interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know what the film's budget was, but maybe it was a budgetary, because, you know, filming in the snow is hard, obviously. I'm not saying it's easy, but I feel like there was just a few things missing from the way that this film looked and the way it was edited. And the music as well, it wasn't great. It was very obvious. Like, it swelled when it needed to swell, and then I don't feel like it was adding to the tension. I felt like it was just doing what you'd expect it to do.
I agree. I think, like, you're absolutely right. I think the filmmaking itself is pretty pedestrian in what could have been way more tense at times, because it is a horrible situation they're in. Like, it is horrible, and it did still make me go, oh my God. And, you know, there's that moment in any movie like this, like, where it's like, oh my God, people stuck in one place. The moment when they first get stuck and all the lights go off, and I kind of looked at the runtime and I was like, here we go then. We've got 80 minutes more of just this now, you know, and you kind of have to, like, strap yourself in for it, don't you? You know, and it is horrible.
It is horrible. Do you think it was... Is it just me reading too much into it? But do you think that it was kind of funny that the guy who was eaten by wolves was literally the guy in Air Bud? It's like, he knows how to talk to dogs. This wouldn't happen to him.
There you go, you see. That's the problem as well. The problem is your mind was going elsewhere, even in those moments.
I was like, just get him to, like, give him basketball. He'll be fine.
Yes. And that was an interesting moment as well. I guess it must be budgetary. And I kind of liked this about it, but the moment when he was eaten by the wolves, we don't see that. Instead, we get a close-up of the two friends as they listen to it, right? And he has
that was horrible.
And he kind of covers her ears. That I like that, because I guess that's kind of more focusing on like the horror that those two are experiencing through it, you know, as opposed to just focusing on the blood and the guts. And what I'm guessing probably would have been a bit of a cheap looking, unrealistic wolf attack if he had actually shown it, you know.
Yeah, I thought that was really clever. Just because at that point, the Joe Lynch character is trying to get across. You know, he's trying to get across the ropes, and he comes back, and you don't know why he's coming back, and then you realize that he's coming back to like cover her ears.
Yeah.
And that was a really tragic moment that I thought was really well done as well.
And you're right, like she really gets put through it in this movie, doesn't she? Because she also gets the kind of the frostbite on her face that's like getting worse and worse, and kind of scabbing and opening up this big like open wound on her cheek. And then there's the moment as well when she now, would you do this, Maha? Would you? I don't know. Just fall asleep casually with your hand on the bare metal bar of this chairlift as well. Like I'm like,
I feel like I would feel the cold immediately. Like, I don't know how she was able to fall asleep with her hand out like that.
But having said that, it is a really nasty, like that moment when she wakes up and then she's like, oh God, I can't move my hand from this bar.
My hand's dead.
Yeah.
I thought that the body horror in this film was actually like, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
Because cold to me, it is scary. I don't know how I would handle the cold, because I've never really lived anywhere very cold.
Have you ever been? Do you do skiing? Have you been on skiing holidays or anything like that?
I have. I went on a skiing holiday with some friends. I went to Switzerland. It was at the beginning. No, it was the beginning of 2022, and so my problem is that I have way more confidence than I have competence. So I probably would end up dying in nature. But, so what I thought was, I was like, oh, skiing looks easy. Like, you just put your, it's like skating. You just put your, you put your feet on these two sticks and then you just go down. Wrong. I can't ski. I've never skied. And I was just like, why isn't this working? And I didn't think to like book a lesson or anything. I thought I'd pick it up immediately. And then basically I ended up having to go on the little baby hill where there were like these Swiss 3-year-olds like doing jumps. And I actually, I fell and I hit my head and I cried like a baby.
Oh, God.
So yeah, no, I can't ski. I had been on a ski holiday, but I can't ski. I ended up basically taking the skis off and then just going for a walk.
Lovely. That's what I would have done too. I've never in my life been skiing on a ski holiday or anything like that. And it always looks really pretty and really beautiful and quite fun. And I always think I would love to do it in theory, but also I would probably break my ankle or leg in 3 places. Like I'm sure something would happen to me.
Fall on the spot and then cry like a baby. And it's like Swiss 3-year-olds just like hop over you.
And also, it's hard not to think of various other films as well. Like you mentioned Air Bud, like I couldn't help but think of Dumb and Dumber when Jeff Daniels gets his tongue stuck to the cold pole as well, right? And I also, of course, everyone thinks of Disney's Frozen too, right? And again, it's not this film's fault that Frozen came out a couple of years later, but that's another issue for this film, I think, isn't it?
Let it go, Mike. Let it go.
Exactly.
Because when you said Frozen, I was like, oh yeah, it kind of is an eco horror, I guess, like.
Wow, that would be really stretching. I mean, like, I've covered Home Alone on this podcast and Jumanji, so that is one thing. But I think Disney's Frozen, that might be a new level of really stretching the definition of horror.
I think we could do it. I think we could do it.
Oh God! But I do think the wolves are a really good addition to the horror, because you do think, oh, what would you do then? So even if you manage to get off the chair and jump off, the fact that these wolves are going to chase you and potentially tear you apart, that does stop you from just going, oh, well, I'd be fine. I'd just jump off and I'd be fine and I'd run to safety. Like, you just think, oh, shit, like, what would you do in that scenario, you know?
Yeah, again, like, this is not your environment. Like, you do not dominate the space. And yeah, I feel like, again, the wolves are just doing what they're doing, so it's tragic. And I think in that moment, the tragedy was that they didn't, to me, the guys, the three people, they didn't stand a chance. I wasn't angry at the walls. I was just like, oh no.
Yeah. I know,
Yeah.
I agree. Did you care much about the dynamics between these three? So you have these two like old best friends from school. One of them has this girlfriend. The other one kind of feels like a bit of a third wheel. At one point I thought, oh God, is there going to be a whole plot arc where the main guy dies and then she's going to have an affair with the best friend? Are they going to end up like getting it on this chairlift? Thank God that didn't actually happen, but I did worry at one point.
Yeah, because I thought, the quality of this film, it might go there, but it didn't. Thank goodness. I thought the dynamics were so weird. I thought they were so weird. Like I don't know why he was so hostile to his friend's girlfriend.
I know. It's weird, isn't it? Like, he was very bitter about the whole thing, like, from the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, so I found the dynamics really weird. And I also wondered, I was like, was there a bit of a vibe between them? Is this a jealousy thing? I don't know. I feel like I feel like it was a little bit toxic, but we didn't really address the toxicity. So I don't know what the point of it was, the hostility between them.
Well, the weird monologue that he tells, Joe Lynch tells as well, about the girl that he liked who was seeing another guy that was laughing at him behind his back, right? Like this whole...
I didn't get that.
This, again, there's something there's a little bit of weird toxicity, I think, like embedded in this film, isn't there, about...
Women.
This boy whose like biggest fear is having this woman laugh at him behind his back, right? Like it's that's kind of like his origin story or something. It's really odd.
Yeah, it's like if he'd survived, maybe he would have become an incel.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Except the film doesn't really reckon with that. Like I feel like now, if this film was made in 2024, it might be that the film is actively about that, right? Like, oh shit, this woman is stuck on this chairlift with this actually quite toxic, dangerous guy who seemed all nice and normal at the beginning, but actually maybe there's weirdness in him. Like, I feel like the film could have done something more with that in an interesting way, you know?
Yeah, that's why I thought the characterizations of these people was really strange. Like, it didn't actually have an effect on the story.
Yeah.
Like, his character didn't actually drive any of the plot. Like, he wasn't particularly heroic. He didn't have like a redemption arc. And Emma's role is to just be scared.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I thought that's where I thought it was lacking. You know, it was very thin. Yeah, I don't know. I wanted to like feel more for their friendship, because he says after the third guy dies, he was like, he has been my best friend, you know, my whole life. I was just like, I don't know why I don't believe in this relationship.
No, I agree. I don't think the film did a good enough job of building that up for us to care. Again, you know, when we talked about The Descent a couple of weeks ago, like the film does this phenomenal job of building up the friendships between these five women before they go down into the cave and the shit hits the fan. So you really feel the emotional weight of everything that they go through with each other. Whereas I think this film kind of was trying to do something like that, but it didn't quite pull it off, I think.
It didn't pull it off. And I think that's why I sort of, as the film went on, I was just watching it for the body horror. I didn't actually care about the characters.
Yeah.
I was curious to see what happens, you know, if and how they eventually get down. Mm-hmm. But I think because I realized that I don't really care about these relationships. They're not real.
Yes.
So I just want to know, like, which body parts they end up losing.
Yes.
Okay, now it's that part of the episode where I'm going to thank our next 30 Kickstarter backers for helping us to create Final Cut, the official Evolution of Horror card game. Final Cut is now on sale once more. Our shop has reopened for the new year, so you can head on over to evolutionofhorror.com/shop to pick up your copy of Final Cut. Grab them now while stocks last. A big thank you to Pascal, AJ Murray, Katie, Key Hugh, Nicholas DeLille, Scott Jameson, Emily Rocks, Jack Rogers, Jerica Griffin, Javier Rojas, Games, Brian Granger, Aaron Jazinka, Jeffrey Zigman, Anthony Sparato, Joe Dell Tonal, David Buck, Asa Wheatley, Jonathan Deffy, Andrew Ward, Michael D. Colburn, Sabas Gonzalez, Cynthia M. Burns, Burns, Jamie Smart, and Brendan Hitchcock. A huge thank you to all of those people for helping us to create Final Cut. And one more time, if you haven't yet picked up your copy of Final Cut, the official Evolution of Horror card game, we do ship anywhere in the world. Order your copy now while stocks last. evolutionofhorror.com/shop.
Do you know which bit I did find quite emotionally impactful, though? When Emma, when Parker, right, is the girlfriend played by Emma Bell. When she goes off into that monologue about her dog being left at home, and that was the bit when I was like, oh god, this is really sad. When she's like, I've got this puppy and the puppy's going to be waiting by the door for me and I'm not going to come home and it's going to think it's been abandoned and then it's just going to be left there and it's going to die because nobody knows it's there. I was like, holy shit, this bit's getting to me more than anything else.
Oh, I know. I can't handle animal cruelty. Isn't that so funny? Like, just the idea of a sad dog is unbearable to us.
Yes. And that was good. I mean, again, it was kind of like slightly shoehorned in the third act, but it did work as like an emotional beat for that character, you know?
Yeah, I think this film was really trying to reach for some emotional impact, and this is, that part it did pull it off. But like you said before, like the story about him being Joe Lynch being laughed at by a guy behind his back, I was like, I don't understand what he was trying to do there. Am I meant to empathize with him?
Yeah, what am I supposed to feel there? Like, that was a strange... that he's just had really bad luck with women. Like, I don't know. Like, yeah.
Also, get over it. Like, someone laughed at you when you were in high school. Get in line.
I know. It's so
High school sucks.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's kind of an interesting one. Like, I definitely think that it's still effective as, like, a genre film. Like, I definitely feel the tension... And I did really wince at the body horror. Like, I found that stuff effective. But I think you're right. I think ultimately, had the writing and the characterization been a little bit better, it could have been even more grueling, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I think if it had been shot better as well, and if the editing had sort of like picked up the pace towards the middle, I think that could have worked. I don't think it's terrible. I actually, I think it's weirdly fun. And the concept is
like a solid sort of, I would say, like a solid 3-star, like middling genre film, basically. Like, that's like fun to put on because it's streaming for free or if it was on TV or whatever.
Yeah, and it is one of those things where it's like you watch it and part of the fun is thinking, what would I do in this situation? Because as the plot progresses and the tension builds as slowly as it does, you start thinking, oh, like, how would I react to that? Because at first it's just the cold, and then it becomes the wolves, and then it becomes, the heights, and it's
horrible. And I think also the other thing that is slightly unsatisfying about it, though, is that nobody manages to get away from their own actions. Like, Joe Lynch manages to get to the safety pole and climb down the ladder and get to safety. Great. But then he dies, like, straight away.
I know.
And so then Parker is left on her own. And the only reason, really, she survives is because the rope breaks, the chair drops, but sort of stops dropping about 10 feet above the ground, so she's able to just jump straight off and then crawl to safety, essentially. So it's not like she doesn't do any satisfying kind of, like you said, tying her clothes together or doing this or doing that and getting to safety. It's just happenstance that the chair happens to fall, like plummet like 30 feet, and so she's able to just like jump off.
It's a Deus Ex Machina, so literally just something happens and then it resolves the plot. I don't feel like she learned anything about herself. I don't feel like any of the characters developed at all.
No, exactly.
So yeah, again, I think this is like a high concept film, and it's satisfying in that way, but
absolutely
afterwards you just kind of I've weirdly like forgotten a lot of it already as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think with both The Ruins and Frozen, I saw them both in the cinema when they were first out. Both of them I had rewatched for the first time, and with both of them I was like, what the hell happens in this film? I don't remember anything about it. So, I think both of them are kind of that classic example of like fun, high concept kind of genre movie exercises, and they both are like, they're not boring, they're fun, they've got that horror and that nastiness and the thrills and the tension, but one slightly better than the other, I think, for sure. Yeah,
definitely. One had a little bit more meat to it.
Indeed. Well, before we wrap up, let's go over to this week's Wild About Horror, because we didn't have a whole lot to say about Frozen, but
Thankfully, Freudian cinephile Mary Wilde does have a few thoughts she wants to talk through on Adam Green's Frozen.
Hey Mike, Mary Wilde here, with some thoughts on Adam Green's Frozen, the story of three friends, Dan, Parker, and Joe, who find themselves stranded on a ski lift at a remote mountain resort due to a series of miscommunications. Left in freezing conditions, they face not only the elements but also a pack of wolves threatening their survival. This claustrophobic thriller explores existential themes, including the absurdity of life, the morality of human actions, isolation, and facing death. The film appears to draw from philosophy, perhaps the works of Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, who examined the meaninglessness of life and the arbitrary suffering inherent in existence. The characters' plight mirrors Camus' notion of the absurd, where they are caught in a situation beyond their control, met with torment that occurs without reason. While the immediate dangers, cold and wolves, are tangible, the true horror arises from the realization that life is fragile and pain can be arbitrary. The film forces the characters to accept the notion of an indifferent universe, where meaning is not inherent and must be created by individuals, much like Camus' assertion that humans are compelled to search for meaning in the world. Sartre's concept that existence precedes essence further informs the characters' internal conflicts. In Frozen, the chaos the characters face while powerless and at the mercy of nature externalizes Sartre's existentialism. Their fight for survival is not merely about escaping immediate physical threats, but about trying to find significance in a hopelessly impossible situation. They must consider the reality that their essence is not predetermined, but defined by their choices during chaos. Emmanuel Levinas's ethical philosophy seems to also be represented in Frozen, particularly his emphasis on moral responsibility towards others. As the characters face death, they grapple with ethical dilemmas. Should they act selfishly to ensure their own survival or prioritize helping each other? Levinas suggests that the sorrow of others compels us to act to alleviate it. However, the film complicates this idea by presenting a situation where the ability to intervene is limited. This moral paralysis forces the characters to question whether their failure to act makes them complicit in each other's agony. The psychological horror of Frozen lies in the characters' existential inaction, their disorientation as they face the inevitable, and the recognition of their inability to control fate. The tension between acknowledging suffering and the incapacity to alter it is central to the film's horror. The trio of friends not only confronts external dangers, but also the internal weight of their decisions. The crisis they experience highlights the futility of their efforts and the overwhelming force of nature. Despite being physically close on the ski lift, Dan, Parker, and Joe remain emotionally distant, struggling with their own fears. This symbolizes the broader human condition. Even when surrounded by others, individuals can feel profoundly isolated in their affliction. The horror intensifies as the characters realize that their proximity does not guarantee emotional connection. The ski lift, confined and claustrophobic, becomes a motif of the emotional barriers that rise as they face their mortality. The film highlights the importance of human connection in times of crisis. Solidarity becomes essential for survival, but Frozen also explores how the stress of their situation deepens their loneliness. The film examines how the acceptance of death leads to a deeper understanding of life. Facing their inevitable fate forces the characters to reconsider what truly matters: relationships, love, and meaning in a fleeting timeline. This might refer to Heidegger's notion of being toward death, where acknowledging mortality clarifies the value of life. In Frozen, confronting death is not just a physical struggle, but an existential one, prompting a deeper contemplation of their relationships. This encounter with death offers the characters a transformative opportunity, helping them understand what is worth living for. The setting, nature's harsh and uncaring forces, indicates the externalization of human struggles. The wilderness represents a universe that operates without regard for human grief, highlighting the characters' vulnerability. Their fight for survival against the cold and wolves underscores the tension between human resilience and nature's fundamental indifference. This struggle forces both the characters and the audience to confront the fragility of life. Frozen can also be interpreted through Freud's theory of the death drive, where humans are driven by an unconscious desire to self-destruct. The ski lift becomes a symbol of deep-seated forces that trap the characters in a struggle where survival is merely a temporary reprieve. Nature's constant threat of death reflects a primordial longing to retreat from life. The true horror in Frozen is not dying, but the realization that the struggle itself might be meaningless, as survival is merely postponing the inevitable, which is a return to an inorganic state. Lacan's concept of the other further highlights the characters' emotional distance. Despite being physically close, they are unable to connect consequentially. This alienation reflects Lacan's idea that, even in relationships, humans face an essential loneliness. The terrifying truth for the characters is that, in the face of death, their intimate connections cannot save them. Instead, they are confronted with the solitude that defines existence. Lacan's concept of the real adds another layer to the film's horror. The cold and the wolves represent the real, the aspects beyond human control. The characters' resistance to these forces deepens their impotence, highlighting the futility of their efforts to impact the universe. The more they try to assert control, the more they are forced to accept the harsh reality that no intervention can change their fate. The characters' struggle in the film is not one of self-discovery, but a bleak acknowledgement of the emptiness of their survival. The true horror lies not in the events themselves, but in the realization that living gives us nothing tangible to depend on, only the inevitable return to the void. Frozen offers a profound meditation on the absurdity of this knowledge. We are compelled to accept that attempts to endure are a futile struggle against an indifferent universe, highlighting the limitation of agency and the essential solitude of the human condition. The film provides no answers and only offers this chilling truth. There might not be any form of meaning that can transcend nature's brutality. Until next time.
And there we go. Trust Mary Wilde to find way more insights than I possibly ever could for a film like Frozen. A big thank you to the brilliant Mary Wilde. And don't forget, if you want to hear more of Mary's takes on cinema and various other subjects, you should sign up to her Patreon ASAP. Patreon.com/Mary Wilde. Okay, Maha, well, we might as well wrap up soon. I guess I just want to ask you one final question, which is how this film holds up. I mean, you've already mentioned, I think we've kind of both already discussed this really, in that compared to The Ruins, there's stuff about this movie that feels a little bit more dated, right?
Definitely. I think that the character of Joe Lynch would be different now, would be written differently, or like you said, like the focus would be on like his problems.
Yeah.
I think that the body horror holds up pretty well.
Yeah.
And I still think it's short enough that it's enjoyable.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think I don't think it holds up as well as The Ruins. I don't think it's interesting enough. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think, again, like, these movies are fun exercises in, like, suspense and pacing and tension, and I sort of admire these sorts of films. Again, like The Buried, 127 Hours, Open Water, these, like, people stuck in one place for 90 minutes. I kind of admire them because they're quite hard to pull off. But also, I don't find them a whole lot of fun to sit through. Like, I'm just like, oh God, when will this end? You know?
Well, do you have any phobias? Because I feel like the claustrophobia ones. Oh man,
I think those ones get to me more actually, probably, because I suppose that's the other slight flaw about Frozen is that I do think to myself, I could just leap off into that snow and probably be okay. And I might be completely wrong. I might not be okay. But the fact that I'm still thinking that through the film means that maybe the film is doing something wrong there, you know?
Yeah, it didn't do enough to engage me to not think about how would I solve this problem.
Exactly, yeah. Well, there you go. Well, Maha, thank you so much for joining me to discuss these films. This has been so much fun. And like, my final question for you, as always, is like, aside from these two movies, what is your favourite film in this kind of whole subgenre, would you say?
I love Twister.
Amazing. Yes.
I think it's a near perfect film. I actually haven't watched it in a while, so who knows? You know, it was made in the 90s, so maybe there's some problematics in there. But
do you know what?
I love Twister.
It holds up. I could confirm, having covered it on the podcast a few weeks ago, it holds up really well. Nothing about it has really dated. Like, it still succeeds in being just a relentless kind of fun action roller coaster ride, basically. Yeah.
I also love Jumanji. I think that's an that turns into an eco horror.
100%. Also covered it this series and completely agree with you, Maha. It's a masterpiece, absolute masterpiece.
Absolutely.
You've gone for two films there from the mid-90s, right? One from 95, one from 96. You're a true 90s child, Maha.
Like I said, the 90s nostalgia is strong.
Yeah, I love that. Amazing. Well, Maha, thank you so much for joining me. And hopefully you'll be back again in the future. But until then, let people know where they can find you, where they can find more of your work and what you do online.
Okay, so you can find me online on Instagram. I'm Maha on Insta. And I also have a website where I have my work. So it's maha-albadrawi.com.
Perfect.
And that's it.
Amazing. Maha, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. And one more time, a huge thank you to my brilliant guest, Maha Albadrawi. Loved discussing those two silly little tense movies. I would love to hear what your thoughts are. Please do get in touch. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us on all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky. And if you want to discuss this week's episode with fellow listeners, you can join the Evolution of Horror discussion group on Facebook, or you can join the Evolution of Horror Discord. If you want to sign up to regular bonus episodes, then sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/evolution of horror. You can find this podcast in all the usual podcast platforms, and if you get a spare minute, I'd be so grateful if you could drop us a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, as that always really helps us get discovered by new listeners. So on to next week then, and next week it's another very fun survival horror double bill. It's a shark double bill. Two actually quite stressful movies. I didn't have a whole lot of fun watching these two films, but I think there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. Next week, I'm going to be joined by a brand new guest, Juliet Sugg, and we are going to be talking about The Reef from 2010 and 47 Meters Down from 2017. Cannot wait. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.